Okay, we're broadcasting now.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone joining us for our special meeting tonight to discuss the city's upcoming budget. This is the second official work session that we've had. The first one we did was on revenue. This one tonight is going to be on expenditures, the budget overview, and the capital improvement plan. I'd like to call the meeting to order. The time is now 6:33 p.m. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Mayor Gore,
Here.
Vice Mayor Bennett,
Here.
Counselor Randolph,
Here.
Counselor Holloway,
Here.
Counselor Parton,
Present.
Counselor Denton, Counselor Pelham.
Present.
Thank you very much. I am going to turn the controls over to the city manager to do the presentation. Council received the presentation about, what, 2-3 hours ago, correct? For
Yes.
tonight. And that's going to be posted on the city's website later on for the public to be able to view outside of the meeting. I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Altman now so he can do his presentation. And also, Mr. Altman, while I'm handing this over to you, you also are prepared to answer some of the questions tonight that we had from the previous work session, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Not
great.
all, but yes, ma'am.
But some of them. Okay,
Yep.
perfect. You now have controls of the screen, Mr. Altman.
Okay. All right. Okay, let me go back. Everybody see it's fine?
Yes, sir.
All right. Good evening, everyone. So this evening, we're going to go through our expenditures and a brief overview of the CIP. Your last meeting, we discussed revenue. So again, this is a presentation regarding our operating budget, revenues, expenditures. We did not do a tax rate increase, and we're within our current FY20 budget levels for the upcoming budget year. And we're looking to be fiscally responsible when we're looking at our budgeting for FY21. These are the 4-pillar approach that we discussed last time that we used when developing the budget. A quick overview for those citizens that weren't with us the other night. Our proposed operating budget and capital budget combined is $174,040,349. That's stretched over across 31 funds in the city. Represents an increase of about $2.67 million or 1.5% over FY20. Our general operating fund budget is proposed at $52,619,876. That represents an increase of $316,847 or 0.61% over FY20. We're trying to remain within our baseline of the FY20 adopted budget, given where we are with COVID. Again, we did not do a tax rate increase. Council approved the tax rates on Tuesday night, maintaining them for the upcoming year. And we did not draw on any unassigned fund balance to balance our budget. There was the healthcare cost increase was absorbed by the city. Again, no tax rate increase. Thank you to council. No new positions in the budget, no new projects, no new debt, no use of fund balance. And our school funding is consistent with the general fund allocation that was provided in FY20. These are our tax rates that council approved for the upcoming budget year and tax year. Our revenue committee, as we discussed last time, is myself, the assistant city manager, our commissioner of revenue, treasurer, real estate assessor, the finance director, and our budget analyst. We conducted our revenue meetings via the internet this year. Overview of our revenues from the last meeting. Again, and these are the funds that we're distributing those revenues across. Council had some questions at the last meeting regarding the implementation of Thomas Brothers and Open Finance. So Thomas Brothers, I know that CSA has been working on implementing that. Open Finance, we still need to purchase. We haven't purchased that yet. We were going to do that about mid-year. We haven't done that yet. The departmental justifications, it's going to take us a little bit of time. Unfortunately, we had some departments that filled out the form and others entered their justifications into Munis. So we have a Word doc on one hand and then in Munis. So we're trying to figure the best way to pull those two things together to get all that information together per the request. Outside agency letters, we're pulling those together to be able to provide those to council. The expenditures to date of our current year budget, which would show our current year budget allocation, the expenditures, and as to the date that we run the report, which is a little bit different what council will have in its packet for the budget. Working through that to print that out and make copies for council. We do have the definition of terms that I'll talk about in a little bit with regard to revenue. And some information on the outside revenue was requested at water renewal. And then there was a discussion of setting a joint meeting with the school board, which we've done that for May 14th. So our definition of terms that were requested at the last meeting.
Do you want us to answer questions at the end or during it? Because last time we asked during the slides.
Go ahead, anytime.
Okay, can you go back to the slide, please?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So thank you for putting this into a slide so we can keep track of the requests. The open finance, I have a question about that. It was a meeting that you weren't present for. I think you were sick and you were out of the office, and that was discussed on the agenda. And at the time we were told that it was already purchased and being worked through. So that was around November timeframe when that was asked. So just to clarify, it was never purchased that you know of.
It has not been purchased yet, to my knowledge.
Okay, do you have the quote to do that? Because when we voted on this last year, the goal was to have it running this budget cycle. And I understand we're behind schedule, which we can address. But do you at least have the quote to get the software that we voted on?
I think the quote was 25. I think 25,000.
Okay, and just for the public, for them to understand, this is a software that people can now track our city's expenditures themselves, as opposed to having a PDF document or something that's kind of hard to read. And it was really, really informative and interactive. So maybe do you have everything you need to move forward with that right now to begin that process?
Yes, we do.
Okay, good. Then the other question I had was regard to the department justifications and the agency letters. I know I heard what you said in terms of what you were gathering. Do you think time-wise we'll have that before our next meeting, or to be able to look over that, or do you think that's probably gonna take a little bit of time to gather?
The agency letters would probably be pretty easy to do by the next meeting. The justification piece, we've got to just pull it in order to get it in a single document. We're going to have to try to pull it out of Munis and dump it somewhere. So we're trying to work through that now. I don't think we'll have that at the next meeting, but I think the easily have the agency letters that were sent to us at the last meeting. At the next meeting.
Okay. In the past, they just print it, sometimes Excel, Munis exports to Excel, and they have like the legal size paper to do it. So whenever you can get the expenditures to date too, that would be helpful. And just if you need anything else, just let me know. I'm fine with having two separate documents if it makes the process easier for you all.
Okay.
Thank you. That's all I had. Thank you.
A little bit ago, I think I saw Mrs. Pellin put her hand up.
Yes, that screen is down.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the increase with the finance department is that 24,000? Is that for that Is that the price increase for this thing you're talking about?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
So this is for part of this budget this year to purchase.
Right. We would purchase open finance out of the current year budget. Yes, ma'am.
So are you gonna go over those questions, why each one of them went up so much? And
Yes,
other,
ma'am.
that, you haven't gotten to that part, correct?
Correct.
And Thomas Brothers, why is that so hard to purchase? That's a year-old request or more.
That's been purchased and they're working through that now.
And what does working through mean?
Well, I know that CSA is working through putting, inputting data and making sure that it's working. So I know that we've purchased it. And I can't tell you that it's 100%, but I know that we've purchased it and that they've been working through getting it up and running to help them with their work. Because as we found out, Thomas Brothers was really developed for like the CSA social services arena specifically. So getting that done and then having that work with Munis.
Okay, all right, I'll let you go ahead with the other.
Okay. So there was a question asked about what the definition of some of our revenue terms was or is. Use of money, though, that is inclusive of interest income and rent paid for property. And primarily in this case, the rent is from Appomattox Regional Library System for the library building. Charges of services, those are our circuit court clerk fees, sheriff's fees, library fees, courthouse maintenance, jail admission fees, police record checks, EMS billing, and e-summonsing. So those are all captured in that revenue line item. Miscellaneous is donations, private grants, a sale of real estate, tax exemption program fees, FEMA refunds or insurance refund, Keep Hopewell Beautiful funding that we received, FOIA fees, our total replacement fees, any employee miscellaneous reimbursement or vendor miscellaneous reimbursements put in there. The local revenue is a payment in lieu of taxes, community attorney Commonwealth, I'm sorry, I should say Commonwealth attorney, not community attorney. Commonwealth attorney, police, and sheriff drug and seizure funds that occur. And then transfers are cost recovery, where we have transfers from the sewer service fund, solid waste fund, and the Department of Social Services. Yes, ma'am.
Is this what you put in our box with the revenue composition explaining that? Did you extract how much each one of those items value?
I don't have a number for each one of those items just yet, ma'am.
I mean, but it has to be somewhere, right?
Yeah, I just don't. I don't have it yet.
Okay, but the next time we see this sheet, we will see that.
We'll try to break it down for you like that. Yes, ma'am.
But I'm trying to see. Is in Munis, correct?
Yes, you sent the email this morning asking about it. I just haven't had time to get it together for you yet.
Oh, okay. All right, so but the next time we see it, we'll see the same thing with the expenditure composition as well. When you explain, and the other thing I noticed when we like you have use of money sometime, the terminology kind of change. You might call it use of money here, but then on another sheet is called use of money / property. Can y'all be more consistent with that as well?
Yes, ma'am.
So that there won't be no doubt that it's talking about the same line item.
Yeah, we absolutely can.
All right.
Mr. Altman, before you move on, let me see if I don't see any other hands raised. And I forgot to check who was joining us by phone. Is Counselor Holloway joining us by phone as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'll make sure to check with you periodically to make sure you don't have any questions. The only question I have is for this last budget cycle, we did ask for this to be broken down for all the parts in the budget that say miscellaneous or general terms, to have them broken out so we can know what it consists of. So when we do this budget in Munis, is it possible to break out miscellaneous and these other items? So like Councilor Pelham has been asking, that we can see the numbers when it's actually put into Munis as well.
We may, but my guess is the miscellaneous rolls up numbers to one category as opposed to having each one of these individual categories listed.
Okay.
But if it rolls up, it has to add. I mean, so it has to be a total before you roll it up. You can't just miscellaneous it has to extract from a total. So it has to be printed somewhere. I mean, to grasp that information. It has to be, you just can't.
And
Correct.
I mean,
we
can you just look into it? And the only reason why I'm asking is because during the audit conversations, one of the things that came out of that, and even the investment committee meeting that you attended with me, there were some questions about the line items being very clear as to where money goes in and money goes out. And by the way that they're labeled entitled. So we can try to, start working towards making sure everything is labeled clearly in the financial system that may help with future transactions. And so I would just ask if you can contact the finance team and ask them, is it possible to be able to do that? And I mean, I know it's possible, but the question is, how labor intensive would it be to break those out for us?
Yeah, it's a matter of coming up with new revenue codes.
Mhm.
So it would be something that you would probably do once the budget was adopted and you had time to change those revenue codes, then you would work through that process. And that would be one of the things that we would want to do in general, is making sure that all of the revenue codes that we have meet the actual need that we have and how we're conducting our business. So
correct. And the Commissioner Revenue and the Treasurer's Office both brought this up to me as concerns and also projects that they'd be willing to work on. So if they can collectively work with the finance department, I think we can, get the ball rolling. But that was the only question I had. Thank you.
I think Ms. Pelham had her hand up.
I still don't understand why you have to have a special code. If the totality of miscellaneous extracts from donations and grants, so it has to be a total somewhere without a code. How does it extract from that total for grants to add it into miscellaneous if it's something that's not already identified?
So we're saying the same thing.
Okay.
Right. Those dollars are there and they roll up into a miscellaneous fund, a revenue line item. And my guess is when Munis was originally set up in 14 or 15, whenever they were doing it, they just utilized the miscellaneous code as the parent code, if you will, for the subcodes, the sub funds that create that one. So it's a matter of us going in when we have that, when we get past this and setting up the funds, the way the revenue funds and even the expenditure funds, if the way we need them to be to reflect how we're doing the business that we're doing right now. My guess is, and I don't know because I wasn't here, and I don't want to give the impression that anyone did something incorrectly or correctly. I'm just saying my guess is we might have followed the code that we had previously when we just implemented, and that may not be the way that we're functioning now, but it was how we were functioning, and we just went ahead and moved those revenue codes over and kept them the same. So it's just a matter of how we are working through our business operations now versus how we were in 14, 15, or 16, whenever those codes were put in place.
Yeah, yep. Councilor Pelham, does that answer your question?
I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dane?
Yeah, I was just going to, from Ms. Pelham's clarity, give her an example. We just had a reimbursement come back from a conference that we were supposed to go to that got canceled because of the COVID crisis. And when that check comes back, we contact finance and ask, where do we code this check to? Where does it go to? Because we can't put it back in our account because our accounts are expenditure accounts, not revenue accounts. So rather than have 5,000 revenue accounts, what they do when something like that comes back, because it's going back to the general fund anyway, it doesn't go back in our account. They just say code it to miscellaneous revenue. So it goes in this miscellaneous revenue account and gets rolled back into general revenues. So there's not it's not a bunch of different accounts that then get added together. It's a bunch of different items that get put into that account, just for clarity.
Thank you.
Yes. Counselor Randolph?
So understand what you're saying, Charlie, but then again, how is that a protection against cross-referencing what's gone out and what shouldn't have gone out or should have been returned and is returned? So how are they cross-referencing in a miscellaneous fund the items that have been returned to offset what was paid out so that we know we got exactly what we should have gotten back? Who's checking that?
Well, I believe I'm not the Munis expert, but I believe in comments it's listed what it is, a reimbursement from XYZ, and it just goes in that account. But that's something that finance would have to clarify.
Yeah, and that's the question that I've been asking is who's actually doing those cross references from the different accounts? I mean, a reference of, okay, well, I bought this and actually it didn't work for what we needed or it was defective and we're going to get a refund because I sent it back, and I code that or make a comment about it and it comes back and they short me by $50 with no reasoning on it. Is there somebody actually checking that?
Well, the person who's getting the reimbursement sees it and they verify whether it's right or not, and then they submit it to that account to be put into miscellaneous revenue. So when the reimbursement came back, we made it sure it was for the correct amount. And we note on there there's a reimbursement for XYZ, and that's where the verification occurs.
Okay, so the person that ordered something is also the person that gets the reimbursement and is supposed to verify that that reimbursement matches what they said they paid for it in the beginning. There's no dual control in this aspect because nobody's double checking behind them.
I don't think that's entirely correct. I think finance is checking back on those, but I don't know. I'm not the finance person, so
Okay,
that's who have to answer by them.
and that's fine. I just was curious, and maybe that's a conversation I need to have with Mr. Terry.
That's why you need to be.
Yeah.
What?
And we should have Mr. Terry in these meetings to be able to answer these questions from council, because they are budget work sessions, and to make sure we all get the information equally. We've been asking about these codes and how things are spelled out in the budget for years now. And I understand how Munis was originally set up, but it's been several years since it was set up, and several years that some of us who's been on council have been asking to have these different funds or areas itemized so we can actually see where money is going in and out. But not to mention, in the audit report, there's been several references to miscellaneous funds, and also there's been complaints about when people are closing out their books having to go back and piece together records because everything is dumped into miscellaneous. And so I think kind of we've talked, we've all discussed this. I think maybe at our next work session, Mr. Altman, if you could have Mr. Terry be here to answer our questions, but also to specifically address this particular question, since several council members are asking about it and how that process flows, how it could be improved, would be very helpful before we also complete this budget cycle.
Okay, we can. So the question would be to discuss how to break out miscellaneous, which is, I think, as opposed to having individual account, revenue accounts with maybe nothing in them, but you would look to have what I'm understanding is council wants to say have a revenue account line for donations or private grants. And each one of these individual items would have their own revenue account line.
Yeah, everything in throughout the budget, because there's another last two budget cycles, Councilor Pelham in particular has brought up in our budget, there's I forgot what it's called, outside department. It's a very general, weird name, but it's just one big miscellaneous section as well in the budget. So, and then there's also miscellaneous within the department's budget. And we've been asking for those to be line item out so that way we can know what it consists of. So the answer to your question is yes, but that's for all miscellaneous or general terms that are catch-alls for multiple things. So it's very clear what goes into what comes out of what. And when we have our audit or we get our budget, we know exactly where the money is coming and going from.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's going to obviously take some work, which is why I think it's probably, hasn't been at the top of the list, because finance director is working on the audit. But at the same time, this really needs to be clear moving forward for future budgets.
Mm-hmm. And you're correct. He's, doing audits year round. So the thought is we can get the audits done, and then we have the opportunity to sit back and really focus on some of these items and give them the full attention that they deserve.
Oh, go to the next slide, please. Unless Councilor Plum, do you have your hand raised again?
Yeah, this is about last time. It's just the fact that if while you considering that this wouldn't be necessary, I think I looked at a couple of the county budgets and the way they report to council, and a lot of them even itemize the revenue for the month.
Mm-hmm.
And actually sends a listing out of all the checks that are written. So the expenditures by month, if we even had that, would be could eliminate so much discussion in doing the annual at the end of the year for the next year, if we could change that financial report that we get every month to something that's more realistic, like our own personal checking accounts. So I'd ask, maybe y'all want to look at something. You worked in the county too, Mark. Did y'all do that? I mean, Ms. Altman, at Powhatan, but it was somewhere I saw it where they actually, it was very open and transparent, so you knew everything.
Mm-hmm.
And did y'all do that in Powhatan by chance?
In Powhatan, I think we gave them at a board meeting at each month, in their packet, there was a list of the expenditures similar to what we email out to council. So you'll get the email at the end of the week for the weekly report. Will have the city's expenditures for March and credit card payment, or for April. I'm sorry, for
We
April.
don't get that.
Ma'am.
We get that.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Every month we send you a copy of all of the purchases for the month and all the credit card statement for the month.
I have not seen that. Maybe y'all seen that, peers? No.
I know.
Has anyone else seen it?
Yes.
No.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I've seen the report that Mr. Altman gives us.
Right.
Okay.
He sends it out to email to all of us, Brenda.
Send me the last one, please. I'm sorry. I haven't seen it.
Just to keep the ball rolling with the meeting.
I've seen it. I've gotten them.
The finance report that council gets monthly in our packet. I think Mr. Altman sent out the last one via email because it wasn't included in the packet. But I think to Councilor Pelham's point, prior to, we used to get an actual munis report for our finance expenditures in our packet for the public to view and us. So the information Mr. Altman does email monthly is almost the equivalent to that. It's just not in our packets anymore. So we just got to make sure that Councilor Pelham, I'll forward the one that I have, the most recent one, to make sure you get it. But then also we can start putting them back in our packet, because that was how it was done before under the consent agenda under a financial report. Mr. Terry includes a different report, but it doesn't include the actual numbers for the public to view. But that can be a conversation as a follow-up for our work sessions with the notes that Mr. Altman's writing down for all of us. Counselor Denton?
Yes, I know I have been questioned several times by people, not only in my ward, but in other wards. The vendor list that comes out of the expenditures each month, they have had to FOIA those when other localities, it's normal to put it on on a city's website. And that may be something while we're making some changes, if that would be a possibility as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Denton. We'll add that to the list. And Mr. Altman, do you need me to, I'm taking some notes. Do you want me to track it with you as well, all these different things?
Sure, that'll work.
All right,
Jane hand been up.
I see it.
Okay.
All right. I have right now the vendor list, the finance report, and the breakdown of miscellaneous.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
All right, Mr. Dane?
Now,
Your hand is still raised. I think it was from the last
not
time.
on purpose.
I know it's from the last one. It never went down.
Sorry.
It's okay. I was watching. All right, Mr. Altman, you can go ahead.
Okay, moving on. Councilor Pelham asked about outside revenues at water renewal. So we've gone back to 2016 to show you those outside treatment revenues. You notice in 19 last year, there was a significant increase in the amount of outside revenue that we're receiving. That is primarily due to our ability to treat, and this is not going to sound great, but landfill leachate. So the runoff that comes from landfills, we're able to receive that and treat that in our system, and it doesn't have any effect on the plant or its operations. So last year, if you remember, was a very rainy year. So we did very well with outside revenue. And then this year, you can see as of Tuesday, we had about $5 million in outside revenue treatment. Those funds, outside funds, are then, when the audit year is completed, are divided amongst the commission members. So the 5 entities that comprise the commission, which are the city, Virginia American Water, Ashland Chemical, West Rock, and Advanced 6. Those funds are then divided amongst the commission members and dispersed. So we are waiting. We have the ability to disperse 16 and 17 now that those audits have been completed. When 18 is completed here, hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll be able to distribute 18. And then when 19 and 20 are done, we'll distribute those funds. And those are the funds that we discussed at the last work session that Mr. Parton, as the chair of the Wastewater Treatment Commission, was trying to get everyone to agree to, instead of distributing those funds back out, utilize those to address ongoing capital maintenance needs at the facility.
Thank you. Councilor Pelham?
Yes, and this is the total. What made us go up in 19 so much?
That was
In 19, we were treating runoff from landfills, and in 19 it rained a lot more than any other year that we've had in recent memory. In addition, they made some improvements at the wastewater treatment facility to be able to offload more than one truck at a time. So they made some improvements to be able to increase the ability to generate more outside revenue through that source in 19. And that's why in combination of the rain and the increase in the additional pumping equipment that we received, that we put in, allow the revenues to go up. And then this year, hasn't been as rainy, but we're tracking pretty well with regard to revenue. And some of that is the result of the additional equipment that was installed to allow for more trucks to come through and offload at the facility.
So if the cost evidently didn't remain the same for all those years, correct? I mean, I just think I don't really agree with council partner about doing the money revenue in that manner. But the cost of everything that wastewater does, it seems like it goes beyond what the revenue is bringing in.
Well, I think the cost of operation has remained not steady, but since the increase in the addition of the new project, and I say new, it's a few years old, we've seen some leveling out of the cost to operate. But you're always going to have capital needs in a facility, and aside from the new portion of the plant, the original portion of the plant is over 40 years old and has some continual ongoing maintenance capital needs there. Replacement of pipe runs that are 40 years old, pumps that are 40 years old. So we looked at the outside revenue as an opportunity to the city not to have to put capital money there, and the commission members and as a whole not to have to allocate funds to put capital money there, but utilize someone else's money to pay for those capital improvements. So that was kind of the thought that Mr. Parton had. Again, it's still under discussion down there, but the facility, I mean, the main facility there, we have to remember is over 40 years old. That was built in the 70s, late 70s, I believe, after or Keepone. So, it's been there quite a while, and it's aging, and we have to do, continual maintenance down there. And for a long time, we probably deferred some maintenance, because when you get in there, you have to somewhat negotiate with your other partners on getting projects done. This was viewed as a way to utilize found money that didn't impact anyone's bottom line to address those needs. So, but we are seeing some increases there.
But water renewal has a $21 million budget almost for expenditures.
Mm-hmm.
Really? Will that ever go down, Mr. Parton?
Well, it's all a matter of, how you look at it. I mean, I can't tell you what the future is going to hold for the wastewater plant.
Okay.
It's like DEQ came out with major nitrogen reduction limits that we had to meet. And, the commission and council had to appropriate money in order to fund that major nitrogen reduction project. And so that increased, operation costs, that increased the sewer rates. If you look at what the state of Virginia and the EPA are pushing, is we might have to do a major phosphorus reduction project. And depending on what those limits are, that could be anywhere between a $50 and $100 million project, and then having to go back and increase sewer rates again in order to keep up with those operational costs. But, in terms of your comments about, the revenue and the maintenance, the older the equipment gets, the more you're having to spend on repairing it. So the more you're having to pay contractors to come in and fix it, you're having to pay more in parts, you're having to pay increased operational expenses. If the plant has to shut down part of its facility, now you've offset the regular workflow. So you may or may not have to pay some fines and fees for that. I mean, it's a lot of variables that go into this, and that's why the previous commissioners in the last 4 to 6 years, when they push back all these, what I call sub or small cap capital projects, your maintenance projects, and you push it back 4 or 6 years, eventually it's going to catch up for you, and you're going to have to pay more. So the idea, behind the policy that we're working on together is to get caught up on these. So hopefully we can have some reduced operational costs. We can have reduced maintenance costs, and if we have outside revenue pay for the small capital plan, then the city doesn't have to contribute anything. That's money that we typically allocate to it that we can go and reappropriate back into neighborhoods and fix issues and problems.
Well, the other issue is that I thought that's what that $74 million improvement project down there was supposed to help with. is,
did.
uh,
It was a $74 million project to reduce the amount of nitrogen going into the James and Appomattox River, but that's a capital cost. That's a one-time fixed cost. You've got to, budget for your annual operating and maintenance costs for that now essential plant within a plant.
Right.
nah.
The,
I mean, I hate to say this, but I
That'll
mean,
come out in another audit. I don't buy that, but we're going. I do not buy that one.
well, if you
Thank
like,
you,
Ms.
Councilor
Pella, I'd
Parker.
be happy to take you on a tour with Mr. Byerly over of the wastewater plant and, show you, the actual facility that the $74 million paid for, and to, go over anything that you might have questions on.
All right. Does he have access to Munis now, Mr. Altman, the director down there?
yeah, that all of our departments have access to Munis.
No, when he briefed us one time, he said he doesn't have that. He didn't have that.
He said he didn't have access to Munis at our audit meeting last year.
He couldn't
Well,
check on anything.
They input, he may not, but well, they do. And I think the question was asked about if he was getting revenue, and he doesn't receive these funds at the plant.
Right.
They come in through the treasurer's office. They don't go into the plant. They don't get checks handed to them down at the plant. They don't take in money.
I know that, but I'm just saying what he said. He did not have, he said he did not have access.
Yeah, and it wasn't about him having revenue. The question, because I remember I asked it, the question was about in the audit, what was raised is they were having an issue with the staffing there. And I don't know which director, staff, or whatever. I know people have changed out throughout that time, but expenditures were being sent out in the system and no one was tracking the payments coming in to make sure that the money was being balanced out. And so the question was, who from his staff, from his procurement or finance team, the same people who were cutting checks, why weren't they balancing it out? And the response that we got was they depended on the finance department to do that for them.
So when we had our meeting in
March, Ellerstein used to do that when he was here.
correct.
That's
Mr.
why they
Hager,
didn't know about it.
right. Mr. Hager he balanced out all of the billings. So what you would get now from when you pay your bill, your sewer and your trash and what now is also stormwater bill, Mr. Hager would balance those books out up in finance.
Yeah, but who's doing it now though? I mean, since he's been
Okay.
gone on a monthly basis for revenue and expenditures is a question. He's not down there doing it no more.
We all take turns.
I'm sorry.
So, correct, Mr. Hager isn't here. And when we had our audit meeting in August, and what we found out as a result of that, and which we reported back to council, was after Mr. Hager left, the decision was made to push the reconciliation of that down to the departments.
Right.
But the departments were not informed of that, nor were they provided access to the system to be able to do that.
Right.
That's what we found out in August. So the answer to the question, now I see where we've gone full circle, and Mr. Byerly said, I don't have access.
Right.
Yes, they do. That's been fixed. And yes, the staff has been reconciling those back years, because we had to go back to, I think, 16
Yes.
to be able to do all that. So
Correct.
we're reconciling, and I can't remember off the top of my head if we're in 20, but I know we've reconciled 16, 17, and 18, and I believe we're almost complete 19, but I don't think we're in 20 yet. So they've been working since August to reconcile, what's that, 4 years of data. So yes, he has access, the staff has access to that now in order to be able to do those reconciliations. And we've been bringing that up. To clarify a question, So the operating budget at regional, at the wait, well, not at regional, I'm sorry, I will forever call it that. At Hopewell Water Renewal is $13 million in operating cost.
Okay. All right. Counselor Parton, is your hand raised or was it raised to respond to Counselor Pelham?
Yeah, well, it's another part of responding to Counselor Pelham. She made a comment about wastewater having a $21 million operating budget, and I'm not sure where that number exactly came from.
I'm sorry, 21 million expenditure, there, Fund 32, that's the operating expenditure budget. Only. On page, they don't have a number of pages, so if you look back on the resolution snapshot, fund number 32, 20,710, $20,710,115.90.
Okay, so you're talking about capital and operating, not just operating, because operating is around 13 million.
Whatever that number represents, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay, all right. Now, okay. I'm on the same page now. That's why I was just,
It's stating operating expenses.
Whatever that number represents, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, Counselor Parton, are you fine?
yeah, I'm good.
Okay, Mr. Altman, before you move the slide, let me check on Counselor Holloway, and then I have my questions written down. Counselor Holloway, do you have anything to ask?
I'm fine. No, Madam
Okay.
Mayor.
Mr. Altman, this should be quick with these. I'm just following up on previous from last budget cycle, some clarification. I keep raising the 576, and Mr. Dane was here at that time when we had to put money aside because when we lost our bond ratings for the sewer account, we had to create another fund to put money in. I forgot who mandated it, but a federal or state entity mandated that we put $576,000 aside to, I guess, shore up a grant that we received or something of that nature. Has that money been repaid back to the general fund yet? Or has it still sit there until we get our bond ratings back?
I believe those funds are still sitting there. And
Okay.
I think it was DEQ that required us to do that.
It was DEQ, that's right. It was DEQ.
So,
Okay, and then around that same time, wastewater came to us on, I think, 2 separate occasions to borrow money against the grants that they had anticipated receiving. Do you know if those funds have been repaid? I think one was about $2 million at one point to get started on a project when they was waiting for the grants money to come in because of the delay. It was around the same time frame.
I'm not aware of, I didn't know that they did that. So let me follow up on that question.
Okay, and if it's helpful, I can try to go back in my minutes to get you that clarity. And the last question that I have is kind of going to what Counselor Denton spoke of. As you know, I tried to get like the vendor report earlier, like last year, because I was trying to find ways for us to save money when it comes to purchasing outside procurement. One thing I noticed with the wastewater, they spend a lot of money weekly cutting checks to different service providers. And that vendor list would be helpful, one, to see where these checks are going to and what the purpose of it is for, because as I talked to you about Public Works, for example, they do spend money making, going to trips to get items as needed. But for example, if they were to get like a warehouse or put something in the house that we have by Weston Manor, they can purchase in bulk. And that way it would reduce how much extra we're paying for one item at a time. Can the same thing be done with wastewater as well? Because as I said, they spend a lot of money weekly. And most of the times I look at the expenditure report, it seems like it's on laboratory supplies. Do you know, do they keep an inventory or stock on site for that? Has anyone looked at these cost purchases to see if there's a way that we can reduce this by buying in larger bulk?
I don't know to what level they buy in bulk. I know that they buy laboratory items to have on hand. They're not, every time they need something They have to go and buy it because you have things on hand. But I don't know to the extent that they buy on bulk. I don't know to the extent that they have storage capacity to have a city stores, if you will, where we stockpiled copy paper and pens and pencils to be able to then send that out. Because I know at one point in time, I believe years ago, the city did have that, and that was something that had to be shut down and audited every year. But I don't think in the current environment, we don't have the space nor the staffing, because we actually had employees dedicated to stores back then. We've decentralized our purchasing. We're not purchasing, but our storage and our acquisition of those items. So, but I can look to see at what level. I know that within the admin building at Water Renewal, they are very cramped for space, to the point that they probably really need, based on where we are with the requirements on testing today, to potentially double the size of their lab. So my guess is they don't have a whole lot of room to spare. So they're buying what they can store and handle, and then having to get that, which may cause to have more frequency. But we can look into that.
Okay, and the last one, I'm sorry, last budget cycle, and I talked about this in a previous work session, West Rock came to our meeting and they spoke during public comments regarding the sewer fees going up. And at the time, all of council was not aware of that conversation that the wastewater commission was having. And when they addressed me, they said they submitted a letter and they complained, but then we were told that in the fall, we were going to have the conversation regarding increasing sewer fees. I don't recall us having that conversation, unless I'm completely missing it. But in earlier Council Parton's comments, he mentioned increasing sewer fees. That has not taken place, correct? Because council hasn't voted on that.
Correct. That's
okay.
We did not have that conversation because we were not talking about increasing fees.
Okay.
I think his comment, though, is if we have to take on that phosphorus project that he mentioned to do phosphorus reduction, yes, then we will most certainly have to have a discussion of fees and a potential increase of fees to create the rate to pay for that capital improvement. But we are not increasing fees. And just for clarity, they came to the meeting, but they came to the meeting with the knowledge that we were not increasing fees. They had a discussion at the Wastewater Treatment Commission meeting of two scenarios, one which would be a budget based on increased fees, and one which would be a budget based on non-increasing fees. And they were informed that we were not increasing fees before they showed up that night.
Okay. Thank you for answering these questions. I'm fine. Councilor Randolph and then Councilor Pelham.
I just had a quick question for you, Mayor. You'd mentioned something about wastewater wanting to borrow against some grants. Do you remember what time frame that was? Was that prior to the first of last year when I came on board? Because I don't remember that at all.
Yep, most of my questions are prior to the new members of council joining us. This is prior budget cycles. It was around the time that we had to put aside the 576 that I was referring to, and then it came to us on two separate occasions to borrow money against their grants. I have the time frame in my mind, but I will go back to find the data to make it easier for Mr. Altman, because I don't think he was a city manager at the time of that as well.
And did council allow them to do that? And if so, for how much? Do we know?
Yes, council did approve it because we didn't have an option at the time because of, again, how it rolled out is when the audits began to be late in 2015, 2016, we were notified that our bond rating had been pulled after, obviously it had been pulled. But what they did was they pulled the sewer one first, if my memory is correct. And then council found out later on, after it had been pulled, through talking to, I think it was Davenport, our bond company. And at the time, they said that we had to put money aside for DEQ for them not for, because we lost our bond rating to support the wastewater facility. But then they also said that we needed to increase sewer taxes in an effort to help get our bond rating back, because they said that they needed to increase the operations budget, how much revenue is coming in. And so council followed that instruction and we did that. But shortly after, we got 2 requests to borrow against their own funds. They wanted to take, don't quote me, they wanted to take from one of their other funds to be able to get the money that they needed temporarily to fulfill their grant. And again, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I know they were multi-million. I think one was 2 million. I think the other one was like another 500,000. I'm not for certain right now. But I only thought about it when listening to Councilor Pelham's questions. It triggered to ask about that again. So I'll have to pull that information and send it out to everyone to make sure to get the time frame so they can look into it, because it goes with the other request that we had in terms of the funding going against the general fund that was pulled out. And I saw that on Mr. Altman's list and he said he was still researching that one. So there might be potentially 3 different things in regards to wastewater borrowing or moving money around to support their operations or grants.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Councilor Pelham?
Yeah, and with that, Johnny, Mr. Parton, thanks for saying that $13 million that they operate, I guess, with this year, but we're programming 20 million for next year. Is that correct, Mr. Alt? What in the world are they gonna do with $7 million more dollars?
Can we wait till we get there?
Okay. You know, I don't mind, it's fine. Just remember it.
Yes, ma'am, we will.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Altman. Go ahead.
Thank you. So this is just a quick overview of our general fund expenditures by department, agency, FY20 versus FY21. Shows the dollar change, percent change between the 2 years. And I'll have a breakdown of some of these later on with regard to those those increases and some of the decreases. Just the expenditures by fund for FY21, totaling down to that $174 million total budget. So again, the healthcare cost was absorbed by the city, so there's no increase to our employees. The proposed budget is handling all those mandated services that we have with social services, CSA, and et cetera. No new positions. There were 67 requested for a total of 4 million. None of those positions are in the current budget. And these are the changes highlighted. So the city attorney's budget is increased by 61,000. The legal assistant that she currently has now, none of that was included in the FY20 budget. So we funded that through contingency this year, and then that was the addition to the budget for the coming year. City manager's budget is up $210,000. That's reflective of some of the economic development incentives that we have for projects that we did development agreements for. Primarily, we have 2 payments for WODA, which is the apartment project there across from social services, and then our agreement with Advanced 6. So that dollar figure is reflective of those incentives that we had agreed to. Commissioner Revenue's office is up. That's increases in their service contracts. As we know, they've gone to doing all of the DMV work. So that's reflective of what they're doing in their office. IT is up, which is not to be a surprise given where we were prior. But what we've done is we were previously budgeting funds and items in for IT and capital that were really operating budget expenses. They weren't really capital expenses, but I'm sure at the time that's where the funding was to be able to make that happen, that project happen. But now we've moved those over in. And then you also have increases with our services contracts. And all of our departments, if they're not listed in the notable changes, have seen increases as a result of benefit changes. So no salary increases, but benefit changes. Police, again, they're up about 190,000. That's
Oh,
benefit
can you hold on
changes.
1 second? Can you go back to the previous slide for IT? And Counselor Pelham, if your hand isn't raised, it's still from the last one. Can you lower it, please? So I
Oh, no,
can,
it's about all these, when you finish, I'll ask one time about
okay.
different increases. I want to enter when you finish explaining why the big increases.
Okay. I have a question about the IT one. Obviously, there's going to be increases here in the city for up until recently really hasn't done many IT or technology improvements. So I don't expect anything less than having an increase in this line item, and it's needed. And I think we've all seen the benefit of doing that. But we did talk about, and we were supposed to talk about in our last meeting, consolidating all the IT money from the previous, all other departments across the city. Council talked about that last year to make sure that every department consults with IT and gets the approval before purchasing new software or equipment, but then also needing to consolidate to prevent people from just purchasing extra items. So has that been done in this budget to consolidate those IT related costs from departments into the IT department?
Well, so we have consolidated in all purchasing is through IT for IT related. The department may pay for it. Like
Right.
say, for instance, right now, development is looking at utilizing some funds to move to the Munis online permitting application. That wasn't budgeted for this year under IT, but development has some dollars, and given where we are right now with limited access to the public, they're going to fund that. But all that is done in consultation with IT. No one gets to purchase computers. We're centralizing computer purchasing and a computer replacement schedule, which we funded. So we've consolidated that now. I'd have to go back and look. We did talk about working towards consolidating all IT related expenses. So
Like these
food,
softwares that we have, because
the-
FOIA software, the meeting software, those bills are due now from the clerk's office. And we got notified, I got a notification that it hasn't been paid yet. So that's an example of where IT would need to pay that bill if it was all city platforms and programs that are universal need to go to the IT department. Is that planned for in this budget?
Yeah, we're planning towards that. Not only just, I mean, computer things, but you think about consolidating phones,
Right.
those types of things into one place. Everything that's IT related, consolidated in one area, because ultimately, whether you're divvying out everyone's in their budget of phone costs, it's all coming from the same place. So
Right.
why not just account for it in one item? So we're working towards that. I'd have to go back and look to see if we've completed that in this budget. If not, I know that's something that we're working towards making that change overall.
Okay, so the universal, whether it be software or services, will be put into IT, but you want the directors to still have like a individual portion for IT costs. So even though they have to consult and get approval from IT, their department will still have to pay for it.
Well, because some things come up during the year that we're not paying for. But everything has to be run through and approved by IT before that purchase occurs. So that department may have to bear the burden of the cost the first year, and then we would roll the cost of the ongoing maintenance into the IT budget.
Okay, thank you. But if it's not something that's a reoccurring cost and it's just equipment or something like that, the department would pay for it themselves, right?
Yeah, if it's something, so let's just use a computer, for example. We have a replacement schedule. And if a department wants to get a computer outside of the replacement schedule or something related to that computer that's outside of our standard computer that's purchased, that department has to bear that cost.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question. Councilor Palmer and Councilor.
Yes, regarding your budget, Ms. Altman, what is an incentive payment? And why would you have to pay? What company is waiting for us to pay them next fiscal year and they've already finished economic development project? And should that really be in your budget versus when we skip down here to development, they have a budget of $1.143,000. why wouldn't that 200,000, if it had to do with economic development, go down in that line item versus staying in your budget?
So the incentive payments are for the WODA companies that council agreed to a few years back.
But that's this, we talking about 21, right?
Correct. Yeah, you agreed to multiple an incentive that's paid out over multiple years.
Right.
Mhm.
That's not only just for them, I hope.
Correct. So it's split about 50-50 between WODA and what you agreed to do with Advance 6
Mhm.
in the last year from an incentive payment perspective.
So
So
we're actually paying them or just giving them a pass on tax reduction?
So in one instance, you're paying them, and in one we're going to collect taxes, and then we have to incent that back, but we have to account for it. We have to have the money to be able to do it. So the money's in our budget, and the reason it's in the city manager's budget, because within city manager's office is economic development, and that's where
Down here then. What's the other development represent?
Tavia.
the development department is Tavia's department.
No.
Ms. Griffin's department, which is planning, GIS, building inspections, CDBG, zoning enforcement. That's the development department.
Economic development is what Mr. Dane does.
Mhm.
That's
And
correct.
that's encumbered in your budget.
Yes, ma'am.
I just never heard of incentive payments. I can't remember. Okay. The other thing is, so the city attorney, that's her personnel.
Mhm.
Personnel had an increase of 24,000. What is that for?
Personnel had which
Human resources had an increase of 24,547.
She's looking at the general fund dollar change.
Counselor Palin, we're on the first page and HR isn't on that one.
Oh,
Can we get to that page, please?
what page? First page.
Yeah, he's on the first one, just city attorney, city manager, commissioner of revenue, and IT. So those questions should be related to those four.
the HR isn't one of the ones that I put on a slide.
Okay.
Each department. So we'll just if I skip to the next slide and go to the very bottom.
Our first page is this one.
So every department has some increases related to benefits and service contracts. Most all of our departments. So that's how, when you have that list that Councilor Pelham's looking at,
Mhm.
you will see that as a result of that work. So either they had people that they hired with higher benefits than the previous person, or someone with a lower benefit than the previous person from a insurance perspective. So that accounts for a lot of our ups and downs on all of those departments. We did have a new employee, not a new position, but a new employee in HR. So that also accounts for some difference in our benefits and our salary there. So that's the reasoning with HR. Mrs. Pelham had, and then you can see the increases for police and fire, service contracts again, benefit changes.
So let's go back to the police. What is $190,000 for? It's not for new personnel.
It is not, no dollars are in here for any personnel
I know you
salary
said that, but
increases
what-
at all.
So all $200,000 is for what again?
Service contracts, we have E911, we have all of those, all of our service contracts there. In addition to that, benefit changes across the department for health insurance.
Counselor Pelham, can you, he hasn't discussed this slide. Can you let him discuss this slide first, and then we can ask questions about this one? And then Counselor Randolph, do you have questions about the first slide? Because he went
The questions I asked, I mean, they on the slide that I'm talking from.
right, that you're talking from, that wasn't the slide that he had on the screen.
Oh, okay. Well, it's the next page.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, he didn't get there yet. Counselor Randolph, did you have questions about the first slide that we were on with IT?
Yes, I did.
Okay, good. We'll go back to that one. Go ahead.
Okay. My question about IT, Mr. Altman, is that your numbers are, I'm concerned that I'm looking at one of the only line item budgets I've seen, which is, was sent to council a month or so ago, and it was council's own proposed budget. And in that, it includes IT costs. And the bottom line on that line item is the bottom line of what you're projecting. And so I'm not sure that the IT costs have come out. So could you please do a write-up, a small paragraph for council to let us know what we can expect in the line item explanations of expenditures for this coming proposed budget as to regards to IT and the costs that they are absorbing from each department? Because I'm not sure that that's happened across the board. Does that
Okay.
make sense to you, Mr. Altman?
Yes.
What I'm asking? Okay. And then secondly, we at a future meeting will be looking at and be given and discussing each department's line item budgets, so that we should actually be able to tie in their, by line item, their higher costs that you've listed here in a very concise format. Is that not correct, Mr. Altman?
Yes, you will be getting you have a line item budget in your box as
Right.
as we speak.
And we will be spending one or two sessions on at least that on expenditures, I would expect. And we should be able to look at those line item budgets and have much more detail as to what caused the expense increase or the dollar change up or down. Is that not correct, Mr. Altman?
I don't know that well, when you look, you'll be able to see which line items cause the up or down. Yes.
Right. But I mean, the detailed line items will list under each department specifics like personnel and FICA and stuff like that, so that we can see if it is truly a personnel increase based on benefits.
Correct.
Okay, so.
Like I'm just looking at council's
Because we're
budget right
getting
now.
into a lot of detail, and my understanding was that tonight was going to be just an overview, but in future meetings, we were going to really drill down on line items under revenues and expenditures, correct?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Altman, you can go to the next slide.
So again, our big changes, police and fire, those are service contract related, benefit related, reduction in costs at Crater Detention Center, an increase at Riverside again this year. We had an increase in per diem to deal with revenue shortfalls there. The commission had met. We actually had a good proposal submitted to compromise from Chesterfield to help move it along. And while we're seeing what I will call a slight increase this year, it could have been significantly more, one to which none of the jurisdictions in the region were able to handle that in a 1-year increase in their budget. So we negotiated to a rate that was more amenable to everyone, all the member jurisdictions. A reduction in our transfers to capital and debt service this year. As you remember, last year we had a big jump. This year we didn't have that. And again, just to reiterate that all of our departments are seeing increases with regard to benefits and services. That's all of these roll up to that that increase that we talked about in the very beginning of about $300,000 to the budget.
Yes.
That total increase to the budget, these numbers vary through departments to roll up to that increase of $300,000. Ms. Pelham did have a question for me earlier today with regard to the decrease that was in the treasurer's budget. And that is solely resulting in a change in benefits. So it's not a reduction in the operating portion of the budget, just with changes in employees, you resulted in changes in benefits. And that was the savings as a result of those changes in benefits.
Hey, Counselor Pelham has her hand raised.
No.
Okay, I have a question regarding Riverside. I understand what you're saying. Chesterfield's change in how they process people going to Riverside has caused the increase. And I understand that we've had to pay more, but overall, do you guys have a plan to address that, since they are sending less people to Riverside and it's impacting the joint partnership between us and other localities?
So we've been working on that plan. What we found going into this budget year, and what we're finding at the moment, is that they are not actually sending fewer people right now. They are sending more people than they have been in the past. So that has helped some. Last year, if we recall, all the jurisdictional members were kind of caught off guard when they stopped sending as many prisoners as they had been, which caused some stress in the budget process. That number has increased, and in this year, Chesterfield's representative actually, we had a preliminary number of inmates to budget off of, and as we got into the finance committee meetings, they actually increased that number, which helped us to address some of those revenue issues. So we're still going to have a little bit of work in front of us in the upcoming year and couple of years to address issues at the jail with regard to funding. But it seems as though at the moment, Chesterfield is sending more inmates than they have in the past. They do have we all have a service agreement, and in that service agreement, Chesterfield has a minimum that they can keep at their jail, and anything above that minimum, they're supposed to send to Riverside. But we had a little bit better experience this year with regard to the budget process and the number of inmates that Chesterfield was going to send.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Holly, do you have any questions?
Yeah. Oh, a question.
Hold on one second. Counselor Holly, do you have any questions?
I do not, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Counselor Pelham.
I'm sorry. And the monies that you deleted from the treasurer's office, is that I know you said all the personnel were deleted from the request. Hasn't she been talking to us about the need for the some type of accounting technical support?
So so the decrease, the 13,000 is not a position.
I know.
And let me look here at the list. So there was multiple positions requested. I'm looking for my list of positions that were requested. There it is. The treasurer did request a CPA at a total cost of about $81,000. But that was along with every other request for this year's budget. We didn't fund any positions, but she did request a CPA at $81,000.
Okay, thank you.
And Counselor Pelham had also had a question for me earlier before we were getting started regarding there's a line for circuit court, and there's a law intern, and that line item is 111, it's called $112,000 for easy math. That line consists of the law intern that the city and Prince George share. for our circuit court here. We budget the funds for the intern, the full funds for the intern, salary and benefits and operating costs related to that, which is about 70,000 of that 112. And then Prince George reimburses the city. The remainder of those funds are the city's share of the circuit court secretary and court administrator that the city funds in addition to Prince George and Greensville through the circuit. So the city is billed for those funds and we pay that. So that then, if you had to answer Mrs. Pelham's question, that 112,000 is representative of those 2 or 3 positions and our obligations from a regional perspective for those.
Okay, thank you. You can go to the next slide.
So the next slide is our school slide. So they submitted a request for 114.8 million. We have level funded everybody through this year's budget where we were last year. So we have the 2.2 million. In the finance committee, joint finance committee meeting, we discussed using the year-end transfers from the I believe it's the 17 budget of 1.1, which would give us a total funding amount allocation to the schools of 13.4-ish. So there's still a difference there that we need to talk about, but we do have a joint meeting with the school board on May 14th.
And Mr. Altman, have you spoken with Dr. Hackney since the schools have let out during this time about any potential funds that we may be able to reallocate to them from this fiscal year to help make up that difference?
We haven't talked about that yet. We know that they're still, as with any organizations, the biggest cost is salary. So they're still paying their teachers. I'm sure there'll be some level of savings with regard to electricity and things of that nature, since the schools are open and there are folks there, but I'm guessing that not all the classrooms have their lights on and things of that nature. So there may be some savings, but we have not spoken about that yet.
Okay, thank you.
I have my hand up.
Councilor Randolph and Councilor Park.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I would think that any savings, I can't imagine that the Wi-Fi buses were inexpensive to outfit and to do that. And I guess what I'm saying is we didn't anticipate or have any extra money at this point to refund the fund that we told them we would work on. And so is that something that we're still anticipating not being able to reimburse this year at all, Mr. Altman?
Yeah, so when we last met, the Joint Finance Committee last met, which was prior to COVID-19, the general understanding was we wouldn't be able to do it all at one time. We would have to probably look at a multi-year approach.
Yeah.
Fortunately, where we are now with our current situation, we certainly aren't going to be able to do it this year. Again, although the sooner we come out of this COVID-19 and the economy starts moving again, the better off we'll be, and we may be able to look at mid-year adjustments if things go well. But right now, I don't think, given where we are, we're kind of taking a worst case scenario moving forward position that we're not going to be able to do it, because if this continues further, that would have further impacts. But
Councilor Randolph, if you don't mind, can I ask you a question for clarity for you ask your next question? Because I think if I answer your question correctly, I think that there might be something missing from that. If I understood what you asked, I think you were talking about the bus replacement fund, correct? And you were saying, is that the fund you were talking about, and reallocating that again this year?
Well, we had talked to them, and as Mr. Altman said last year in our budget, when we took money out of their fund, we had talked to them about replacing it. So what he answered to me was similar to what I was anticipating, which was that we weren't going to be able to reimburse that fund, although we had talked to them about reimbursing it for in increments.
Yes. Okay. I did understand your question correctly. And I don't know if Mr. Altman touched on that, but his response, I don't think he did, but he didn't. So they do have remaining bus allocation funds from the rest of the fiscal years that we have not audited yet. So I think we took FY16's bus funds, and that's what we kept that $5 million. And if my years are correct, we were looking, maybe it was 17. I think we had one more years left of bus replacement funds that they were anticipating when the audit was completed that we could still utilize. And that is the funding that I think is represented in this slide, right, Mr. Altman?
Yeah, the 1.1 would be year 7, FY17.
17, right?
So you still have 18, that's the last year left that they have been saving money. And I think it might go to 19, but 20 is the year that we cut it off to set all the remaining funds go back to the city. So I think when we were talking, there's 1 or potentially 2 years where they do have savings sitting out there that were anticipated to go back to that bus fund. But council said we wouldn't do that anymore. However, prior to us saying that, they still had that money saved. So we were looking at, that's what Mr. Altman was talking about, the multi-year process is looking at those years that we haven't audited yet to see about those fundings. Is that clear?
I wasn't unclear. My issue was refunding. We had talked about it because in 22, we're going to have to look at the expenses for the schools to start increasing dramatically, we anticipated, because that's when the federal funding for the year-round school would stop. So we had looked at how and in what capacity we were going to be able to reimburse. But
okay, yes. So I wasn't saying that you weren't clear, but you made a statement saying that there wasn't any more money left over, and I'm clarifying that there is actually, and that's what's listed in this PowerPoint. And we have another year or two.
That, but for the year that we took last year and used that, that's what I'm referring to, what we said we would reimburse to them. And we're still going to talk to them about that, I would assume, in this upcoming meeting, correct, Mr. Altman?
It's in the PowerPoint.
It will be certainly, I'm sure, part of the conversation with regard to how we move forward with funding. It certainly was a discussion that the joint finance had, and how to handle that and move forward. And the mayor was at the last meeting along with myself, and I think we agreed that it would be a multi-year. We'd have to take a multi-year approach and looking at it, and then whether we could actually fully refund what was previously in the bus replacement fund. We weren't sure if we would be able to do that, but we knew that it would take a multi-year approach to look at that, and then also looking at how we can plan for larger capital expenditures into the future.
Correct. And using the revenue that's left over to apply each year to try to fill in the gaps until we were whole.
And I realized that, and I thank you, Madam Mayor, for clarifying my questions and my concerns. And part of what I'm trying to do is that is very convoluted, and a lot of this may not make sense to everybody that's listening out there. I realize that it's on the slides, but I'm just trying to make sure that everybody understands that this is not a concern. This is something that we're aware of and are working on it. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Parton.
I think my question's been already answered from Ms. Randolph. My question mainly was just making sure that that $1,036,069 is being given back to the schools,
right,
to help replenish that bus fund that we ended up taking from last year.
No, and I think that's the confusion part. I'm sorry, Councilor Parton, go ahead.
That's good. I just wanted to hear from Mr. Altman. I mean, is that where that money's being applied to, or where is that money being transferred to? Is that operational money?
Correct. That would be additional dollars put towards their operating request.
Okay, so if that's going to be additional dollars going towards their operating request, then then your budget that you've prepared for us
It's
is
not.
proposing to not put any money to replenish that $2 million.
Yeah, the bus fund money, that $2
Correct.
million, we do not have the capability within the current year budget to be able to do that with what we're looking at from a revenue perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I understand not putting a total of 2 million in there, but doing it in a phased approach. But I mean, you're proposing to not make, I mean, I hate to use this phrase, any attempt at putting any money in this year.
Correct.
Okay. Well, I'll just say, right up now, and just for the record that, I'm not in favor of that, because I think, we made a promise to the school system that we would, make a good attempt and start trying to do this. And I understand that, we have, issues with COVID-19 and revenue reductions, but I still think we need to make a good effort towards at least putting something in there to show an honest effort of, replenishing that money that we took. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Councilor Parton. And Councilor Pelham, I see your hand is raised. You don't mind if I try to just provide a little clarity for the public that's watching?
I would like to go first.
Go ahead.
The other thing is that, I mean, y'all talking like this is personal money. This is taxpayers' money, first of all, that they were good stewards in saving and recouping at the end of over maybe a 10 to 15 year period. So it's not like we have to negotiate. If we give them the $1.1 million a year in transfer, that means they also, again, manage their money well. And they gonna come up with this much savings, I'm sure, because we closed down as a school system as well. And some of that money may be trickulated into that. So to me, it would be feasible that the 2 million tax dollars that they saved over that 10 to 15 year period could be subtracted if we show goodwill faith and subtracted from that $2 million, because that $2 million also was designated for things like the track or one-time expenditures. And that between, if we subtract this, again, good steward money that they save, and that's true, that has to be transferred back into the general fund, and then we'll take that back, and I mean, it'll make their budget whole again. But I to say it wouldn't be like we're going back on our word that we didn't try to get the money back to them, except because again they managed to come up with the savings of not being able to. They got extra money from federal, extra money from the state. Therefore, they didn't have to spend the total $12 million that we gave them. They spent the federal and state money, which yielded again a year in positive for them. So it's all taxpayer money, guys. So you have to look at it like that way. We don't owe the schools, and the schools don't owe us. So when we're managing the taxpayer money, if they didn't have to spend our money, then I think this subtraction should come from the 2 million in good faith from this 1.1, and whatever that leaves, less than $1 million. That we work out whatever those other last minute expenditures that they had for those one-time items, and not do it this fiscal year, because the corona is a serious thing, and that is a priority. The kids are getting educated. I think this is an estimate, and by the end of the school year, because we're not in school, they may save even more money than $1.1 million. And if that's so, because then that will reduce that $2 million even more of the tax-based money, so that we don't have to do a tax increase, which Mr. Parton didn't want to do anyway, I'm sure, and save your tax base for your neighborhoods, your citizens, versus a school budget. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Altman, before we proceed, I just want to provide clarity. So there is a lot of going on, a lot of back and forth in this section. And I think people are confused, to Councilor Randolph's point. For those who are watching, to understand what we're discussing, last year there was a 2 million shortfall in the school's operating budget that they needed to have filled because council did not fund them at their request. At the same time, each year through a gentleman's agreement, and there's also understanding that has happened each budget cycle, the schools were allowed to save their leftover money and put into what's called a bus replacement fund. That fund was used to replace buses and do other capital improvements or maintenance needs they needed throughout the year. Over time, that fund grew to be about $5 million. Since council did not fund them at their requested amount last year, we had to take $2 million from that fund and apply it to make their operation budget whole. That left about, and I think it was 2.5 actually, that left another 2.5 left over. When we talked about what they would use that leftover money for, we had identified that they had already planned projects in that fiscal year to do maintenance and other things. So essentially that $5 million was wiped out last year. And so when council met last year, the majority of council said not to allow them to be able to save this funding each year, because what's supposed to happen by law is all money left over throughout the city is supposed to return back to our main checking account, which is our general fund. When Mr. Altman said I was present for the finance committee meeting, he's correct. We've had two, or I think three of them, two I think at this point, prior to COVID-19, to discuss the upcoming gaps that we anticipated. And that is the same $2 million that we had last year. And the reason why that $2 million gap exists is because we used their fund to fill in the hole. We still never increased their overall funding. So starting this upcoming fiscal year, we know that we're going to be short $2 million. And so what I was trying to express is, since we have not caught up on our audits, we're behind. Therefore, each year up until we had this discussion last year, they have been saving money each fiscal year. And so now that we're getting caught up on our audits, we're in fiscal year 18. When that audit is completed, the schools will have money that they had anticipated saving. So they will essentially start back up their bus fund. In our finance committee meetings, what we said was, as a recommendation, we had 3 different recommendations. One would be to use that funding the same way we did last year, to take it and apply it to the operation fund, because we simply can't make up the $2 million gap without increasing taxes for residents. But at the same time, since they're not going to be able to build up their bus fund, we would incorporate their major capital improvement projects into our budget. And so we asked the schools to look over what were the key things that they needed to have addressed this year that could not wait longer. And that's what Mr. Altman is saying. We're looking at long-term capital improvement plans to make sure that we meet their needs, since we're not giving them back the bus replacement fund. And so after 18 is finished, that is the 1.13609 that's in here. When 19 comes up, that'll be another pot of money. So at some point, the goal is to make it to where when this money runs out, because as I stated, this was a decision of council last year, those fiscal years will catch up. And so when we get to fiscal year 20, which is a year that council made the decision not to allow them to get their money back, we'll have to figure out how to plug that hole indefinitely. And so right now we have time that we have a cushion to be able to fill the gap, but ultimately it's going to be a larger conversation about what that looks like. And then with them going on to balance your calendar and the $3 million, it's going to be another conversation. And Mr. Altman, you're correct, it is FY17 that's in this one. So we have 18 and 19 to go. And that's the clarification I was just trying to provide for everyone who's watching, to know that we're using that bus fund to help them fill in the gap of the $2 million. In doing so, we were trying to work out deals in which we could make sure that their capital projects were still taken care of. So it wouldn't be that we're taking their bus fund and then not allowing them to have money to be able to do their projects. Is that correct, Mr. Altman?
Yes, ma'am.
And so we had 3 different options that we were going to present to council during the upcoming joint school board meeting, but of course, since the coronavirus, we haven't had it, but that'll be coming up. So we've really, all of us came together to rack our brains around how we can do this. So we wouldn't have to raise taxes and the schools wouldn't be without, and then we can work on a plan to fill in the gap, but then also find a way to let them still save some of their money for additional things that come out the year, because even though they may plan for capital projects, we all know emergencies happen and they don't need to come to us for every emergency, but they need to have some funds available as a contingency.
Mhm.
Right, Mr. Altman, is that clear? I mean, is that accurate?
Yes, ma'am. Yep,
Okay.
that's absolutely what we talked about.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Randolph?
Mr. Altman, I remember what the other half of my question was. As the budget is written, we're also not going to have the funds this year to do what council had discussed last year, which was potentially put the schools on the same accounting finance system as we are on Munis, so that we could better help manage everything. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so will we hopefully readdress that the coming year and look to see if that's something that council still wants to do and move forward with it if and when we have funds for next year, potentially, I hope.
Yes, ma'am. That's the plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Ottman, can you go to the next slide, please?
Yes, ma'am. So this gets into our CIP, our capital improvement program. So the 5-year total CIP requests were just under $32 million. The one single year FY21 request totaled 18 million, and we only had about 1.2 to fund capital. So the fundings we have there are for some IT improvements for police and EMS software, radios and hose expense at the fire department. We have the last fire truck we purchased is under a lease. So we have the lease payment that we have to make. And then we have VDOT matches for all of our road improvement projects that Mr. Butler and Mr. Anderson undertake for us. So the remainder would go towards those matches that we have. And that's the limitations of our CIP for the upcoming year.
I can't get my hand up.
Go ahead, Councilor Plum.
Why didn't you include would this not include the social services, $250,000 roofing project and $100,000 air conditioning project?
So those projects were requested so each department, when they made their request, and what you see in that the sheet that you got was the year they requested it in, but that's not reflective of how we're able to fund those projects.
It's under fiscal year 21.
Right. So they made the request under 21, but we also had $18 million worth of requests in FY21, but we only had 1.2 million to be able to fund those requests. So while the list you have shows the year the department asked for it, that's not reflective of what we can afford to pay in that year.
How old is that building?
I believe we built, I think it was 2011, maybe it opened.
And why do we have to buy a roof and an air conditioner already? Do we need to go back and sue the contractor?
We probably need to go back and do a little bit of investigation into what warranties we may have there.
Well, we need to do something, a 7-year-old building and doing a roof for $250,000 and an air conditioning for another 100,000.
Yeah, we need to look at that. I don't remember, and I wasn't, I was here when it was built, but it wasn't one of the projects that I dealt with, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, with the planning. You were over the planning.
No, planning didn't get that one to do back then. That was one project that I didn't work on, but we can look at, and it was a design build project with a contractor. So we could look at what type of warranties we may have. My guess is we've done that, and that's why they're showing, and we don't have a warranty still on the roof, and that's why it's showing up.
Almost to have a 7, I thought roofs could last 20 years or 10, 15 years.
Depending upon the roof, yes, ma'am.
And another 100,000 for AC.
Mm-hmm.
Well, please give us an explanation of why that's up already.
Well, in the packet that you had, the information you have in your council box, each one of those capital projects has a capital sheet that's included in there with a project description and a project justification. So just flipping through it.
Must got the wrong pack.
It's in the mailboxes now.
In the mailbox right now.
Yeah.
Well, that don't help me here, but well, that explanation. I was gonna say I must got the wrong packet because I don't see all this stuff y'all talk about.
They dropped them off this evening, I think.
Okay, all right. That
Yeah.
makes-
It's sitting in your box right now for you to come.
Okay, okay. But I'm
It'll
saying-
have a project description and should have a justification in there. And then we can also look in, I'll ask the question about the warranties.
Well, and then I would ask Mr. City Attorney if she would look into the contract that we let with that contractor and see if we just failed because we just wrote a bad contract. And if not, would they still be liable at this point? I always push for local contracts, but it seems like they always sometimes get it to be a mess. When it comes to dollar bills.
Well, that one, so that contract, and if you remember, was a design build. So we didn't do it. Traditionally, you may hire an architect that designs the building to your specifications. You bid that out for construction, and then the contractor builds to your specifications. In this instance, the design build, the contractor designed the building and with some input from our Department of Social Service members. And it was their design and that was constructed. So I'm not sure. We 2010 or 9 when we did that probably. So we could look back and see if we can find that information. But I'll also ask the question of our public works maintenance folks if they've looked at the warranties. And my guess is that they have, and that's why these projects have appeared on our list because they're probably not under warranty.
All right, such a way. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Altman, is there another page? Is this the last page?
So this is just the CAFR conversation that we had Monday night or Tuesday night, updated here to show that all the auditors are utilizing remote access for the 18 CAFR, and we'll be doing the same thing for the single audits to get 16, 17, and 18 done on the single audit side. And then these are just your future work sessions. Next week, we have 2, skip Tuesday the following week because that's a council meeting, joint work session on that Thursday with schools, then 2 more after that. And this is just to remind y'all that your expenditure and P portions of your budget book are in your mailboxes this evening for you to pick up. And that's all I have.
You go back to that.
Hold on, Counselor Pelham.
Oh, is that in our box too? That sheet here, or
The books that go along with this presentation are in our boxes this evening.
okay, so we'll have this flyer in print.
This presentation is in your boxes as well.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Yes, the presentation and the budget information for this presentation are in the mailboxes.
Yeah, all your line items that you're looking for, so you can comb over and look at are in your boxes.
Mr. Altman, I see there's 2 other hands raised. Can you make a note under the miscellaneous? Do you remember last year I think it was called cost recovery from the fire department in regards to those reimbursements? When I checked on it the first time, they said give it a year and then we can get the information. I waited a year, I asked back for the information, but apparently there was some issues and they said wait 6 months so we can start collecting that data. When I checked back in, they said that they were getting some data in regards to the money that we were able to get reimbursements from Medicare and Medicaid. Will you be able to have that later on in our packets as well with the miscellaneous funds for us to see how well that is doing with that position we created?
Oh, yeah, and I can, yeah, it's doing very well. I mean, that individual is more than paying for that salary and some more with the work that they're doing with cost recovery, for sure. But
Perfect.
we can have the EMS cost recovery figures for you.
Perfect. And then I have three, I wrote down my 3 points. Social services, early on when you're talking about Thomas Brothers, social services is another part of that. They had another reconciliation implementation from Munis that the auditors talked about. So when you talk about the reconciliations, it wasn't just CSA, it was also social services. Can you please check with Ray to make sure that I'm tracking that correctly? Because I remember they said they do one step themselves, but there was another step that they can use, and that's from Munis implementation.
Okay.
And then the other question is, with what you have estimated here in our first work session, I talked about the revenue. You guys have an anticipated $500,000 increase. Does this reflect that increase still with how you're dividing up the money in the budget, or is this without the $500,000?
So this is is inclusive of the money. We did not reduce out the $500,000 that you discussed at the last meeting.
Right, and when I brought it up, the comments were, well, we'll show you that in the expenditure side.
What, right, so what we talked about was looking at how we can do cuts, and I know that that's going to be one of the discussions that I'm sure council is going to want to look at, is what you may want to cut out of the budget. So that's where I figured once we got into the line item piece of it, we could have that discussion a little bit more based upon what council may be looking to cut or fund and move money around. But we can, if you want a recommendation from staff as to where we would find the $500,000, we can provide that.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping to see, what your thought process was regarding this. And that's all I have. Counselor Randolph and Counselor.
Madam Mayor, I hadn't finished before you added your little 3 points.
Oh, no, you just blurted out if you had the stuff in the mailboxes. I didn't know you had questions. I'm sorry.
Oh, maybe my hand was raised, but the next sessions, all these sessions here, can you put that on Mr. Terry's calendar?
Yes, ma'am. I'll see if he's available.
You know, he knows he's the finance officer with CAFR and the budget.
Yes.
He knew that when we hired him 3 years ago. So he said he could do it. So I'm gonna hold him to his word. I would like to. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Randolph and Counselor Denton.
I'd like for us to look at May 5th and May 7th as a council and decide what major topics are we going to talk about, the budget as a whole, or are we going to do expenditures and then go back to revenues in detail and kind of get a more detailed process for at least next week, since we've got 2 meetings set.
I thought council adopted the city manager's recommendation, because that was the purpose of the special meeting I had called to do the exact same thing. And on the last regular meeting, there was a motion to adopt the work sessions that he had presented in the layout. So I thought that he already had that mapped out for us.
If he does, I'd like to see it, because otherwise what we're seeing here is not giving us that. So Mr. City Manager, would you please give us a more detailed agenda for the 5th and the 7th for how you want to line these up on the 19th and the 21st, because they're all blank as to what the details should be about, please.
Okay, I can do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Counselor Denton and then Counselor Parton.
Go ahead, Counselor Parton. I'm just saying, I think we have asked our questions as this was brought out to us as counselors. And I know our city manager is not feeling well. So I was in hopes that we could adjourn until we get back on the 5th with more details on the expenditures and the income.
are you making a motion to adjourn, or are you gonna let council?
Well, no, I want the, Councilor Barton had his hand raised, and I think he should go ahead if anybody has any, but I think we should wind it up because I know Mr. Altman is not feeling real well, and we could be here all night. So I'm just trying to wind it up. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
Okay, Councilor Parton, and Councilor Jane, if you don't mind, I'm gonna still check on Councilor Holly since she is joining us remotely, and we do it.
That's fine.
Okay, Councilor Parton.
Thank you. Mr. Altman, yeah, I know that you said that you just gave us the line item report today in our mailboxes, but off the bat, can you tell me essentially, well, basically, you know, I'm just so passionate about it. Do you know if the public work paving budget has been increased any?
It has not been increased over what we currently have.
Okay.
The FY21 budget is basically a reflection of the FY20 approved budget.
Okay. Then that answers my second question. I won't ask that one. The third one that I had is when Mr. Badiata gave us a presentation earlier this year about what it could have been fall of last year, was his stormwater program. He mentioned that we're going to have some pretty big stormwater projects coming up. Are we budgeting any money for those, like the Mathis Field Stream Restoration Project, to help allow that? And then the outfall stabilization projects that will help meet our was it TMDL environmental permit limits?
If I remember correctly, and I may or may not, I think Mr. Badiata had some funding available for the Mathis project.
Okay.
But we're not, aside from the capital projects that were listed, we're not funding anything additional at this point, and we didn't recommend an increase in the stormwater fee this year. Just one of the things that we contemplated, but when we got into COVID-19 was one of the things that I put to the side based on not knowing how long it would go and not wanting to create an additional impact in the community. So, but that would ultimately be probably the answer to funding some of those projects, would be to look at his current fee. But the other piece that I think we can, that will help us, is if we move our collection of that fee to the real estate tax, not the tax itself, but add it to the bill. And then that will, when people pay their real estate taxes, they'll also then pay the stormwater fee for the year over 2 payments. So that would then increase collections with regard to stormwater fees, which would then put more money in that budget each year.
Okay. I mean, I think that's actually a really good idea, doing it that way. And then if we did it that way, would we end up taking out the stormwater's percentage ownership and paying the outside collection agency, and then splitting it between the wastewater and the solid waste funds?
Correct. We would remove them from the outside collection agency, and ultimately our plan would be to move collections in-house for all of those bills.
Right.
But it would take that piece out of it, and we would collect it at the time of real estate tax payment.
I think that's a wonderful idea. I think that will actually help a lot of neighborhoods with their drainage issues.
Mm-hmm.
Good thinking, Mr. Altman. I'm proud of you.
It's a team effort.
That's all that I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Parton. Councilor Pelham, was your hand raised again? Or okay. Councilor Jen, I know you want to leave, but Councilor Pelham and Councilor Randolph have raised their hands. And I promised I was going to call on Councilor Holly if I call anybody else for a second time. Councilor Holly, did you have anything to add since you're joining us by phone?
I just would like to ask the city manager, has he completed the list for the paving project?
I have not received that yet from engineering, but as soon as I have it, I'm going to email it to council.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Holloway. Councilor Pelham and Councilor Randolph.
Yes, you know, you have to, okay, there, one question is in transfers, why is there this decrease for debt? Well, you don't have to answer tonight if everybody's interested in leaving, but that in the transfer is decreasing in the debt for capital and debt. The other question is how much flexibility is in this budget versus the fixed amounts that you've given us?
Well, it depends, I guess, on what you mean by flexibility.
Whatever you, in the budget, what she talked about earlier, everyone has whatever that word is concerned in their little budget contingency. In every department, the budget has a contingency fund. It seems. And
Miscellaneous is the word I use.
which it was one of them, some general fund just to be out there. So is that money that we could, that is flexible enough to decrease from budgets, or is that something they really, really have to have? And
I think it just depends on, some departments have a miscellaneous line and some do not. So we would just have to go and look at, one, how much that adds up to and what those dollars are really there for. It may be something that we have to do, but we just haven't gone to the extent of adding an actual line item that's representative of what that cost really should be. And overall, what we need to be doing over time is eliminating all the miscellaneous line items from departmental budgets and budgeting them towards something specific.
because if we project that revenue is going to reduce because of meals tax and all those things because of this crisis, then of course we have to be flexible enough to be able to make those tough recommendations to reduce something versus word that we never want to use, layoff.
Correct.
And I mean, so with that, I mean, that's something that be thinking about, that you can give us a priority listing of if we have to reduce things, what is your priority?
Right.
Okay. That recommendation to us. Something else. The other thing is, again, if you get tired, that's why it's important that we have the finance guy here to be a backup or to answer some of the court, to address some issues that right off the bat that you may not be totally aware of, or whatever the case may be, but I look forward to him being in the rest of these budget meetings.
Okay, thank you, Counselor Pelham. Counselor Randolph?
I'd like to make the motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, motion's made by Counselor Randolph and seconded by Counselor Burton. Roll call, please, Ms. Brown.
Vice Mayor Bennett,
Yes.
Counselor Randolph,
Yes.
Counselor Holloway,
Yes.
Counselor Parton,
Yes.
Mayor Gore,
Yes.
Counselor Denton,
Yes.
Counselor Pelham.
No.
Adjourned.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful night. And don't forget to get your packets out the mailboxes for tonight's presentation, so you can look over the information. We have a detailed meeting. Bye-bye.
Mr. Altman, I hope you feel better.
Thank you.